Hello, this is Joe from Uhan Performance, and today I want to talk about visceral mobility. Viscera is the abdominal organs. And there's a lot of them, and there's a lot going on in here. And for the longest time, I believed, and as most runners do, that the viscera serves to do digestive functions and internal functions. And that's certainly true and really important. But what I've recently learned is the importance of how these structures in this cavity, both our rib cage and our pelvis, how important it is that they move to allow functional mobility to occur for the running stride. And so there's certain movements associated with running, the hip flexion, pushing off, trunk rotation, they're all heavily impacted by mobility of the visceral organs and tissues. That includes things like the diaphragm, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and the liver. And subtle restrictions in that visceral mobility can significantly impact how we run. For example, somebody may have a really stiff right hip or just a subtle difference in hip mobility. There's an aspect of their stride, it just doesn't feel like they can get that hip to extend quite as well as the other side. That actually may not necessarily be because of a stiff psoas muscle. There may be aspects of the viscera that aren't sliding or gliding within the trunk or the pelvis, and thus not allowing the pelvis and then the hip to extend in the running stride. And so I'm going to show you guys a couple quick sort of self-assessments to see whether or not your visceral mobility may be an issue. But before we do that, a word of caution. Number one, you should always consult a medical professional before doing anything, especially in this area, and especially if you have pain here. Very seldom is pain necessary to have a mobility deficit. And if you're having pain or pain to palpation or pushing at all in your abdomen, you want to see somebody about that. And so don't try this at home unless you have done that. And even if you do discover something, I strongly suggest that you see a skilled practitioner to help you work through this. But I want to kind of give you guys some tools to self-assess to see maybe this is an issue for you. And so when we do visceral self-assessment, we're just kind of thinking in global terms. We have this just massive stuff. It's not necessarily important for you to understand what it is, although I'll kind of point out a couple things. I think the biggest stuff in terms of volume is the small intestine, which kind of lays on top. And that's going to take up the kind of the first couple inches here. The liver is a really interesting and rather asymmetrical part of our system. The liver is almost like this big kind of prism or pyramid, and it's mostly on the right side. And that can be a source of significant stride imbalance potentially. And then you have the large intestine, which basically goes around the perimeter. It starts rather large on the right side. It goes up, across, down, across again, and then out. And believe it or not, all that stuff has to move a little bit. And so if you think you may have a visceral mobility deficit, maybe because you had a bad fall, maybe because you've had some sort of bruising or impact here, or maybe you've had a systemic illness, digestive issues, things like giardia, which I've had, those things can cause subtle motion restrictions. And so this is what you're going to want to try to do. You can come down on your back with your knees bent, because this is going to kind of slacken the system. Sometimes having a pillow will kind of help give some slack too. And so basically what you're going to do is you're just going to take the flat of your hand and really gently just kind of pull. And it would be like you're just grabbing this like soft mass and you're seeing if it can move. And in the efficient state, it should be able to move a few inches. And then at a certain point, it'll stop, but it'll have this springy end feel to it. And so you can go shallow, you can go medium, you can go deep. And I'm just taking my hand, I'm supporting with the other hand, and I'm just springing. And a week ago, I was very stiff here. I'm doing a lot better. So I can come on the right side, I come on the left side, and I do the same thing. After that, we can go into more functional mobility that is running related. we can do a leg rotation. And so what I'm doing here, this sort of mimics the subtle rotations that need to happen in the running stride. And so in these rotations, you still need to have that mobility. And so again, kind of feeling, does that happen? There I get a little bit stiff. And then same thing on the other side. Another interesting thing you can do when assessing this mobility is doing a heel slide. Doing hip flexion, hip extension, that's another big part of running. And so you can tension a little bit the side of your abdomen and just feel whether or not it moves. So